welcome to RPG Community College. Today I thought I would go over how I build my first character on a new account in Grimdawn. With the new patch that just hit, I came back to the game and I decided to delete all of my progress and start over from scratch, kind of like a new league. And I thought there'd be a lot of people out there who would want to learn how to make a really strong character on a completely fresh account that has no gear or anything. As most guides that you're going to find for the game focus on endgame builds that are super min-maxed. So I thought I'd just go over how I make a character when I have absolutely nothing. So to start off, we're going to want to head on over to Grim Tools. You can find a link to this website down in the description. This is the community's kind of build-making site. It is very, very useful. And this is pretty much what this whole video is going to be about, is making a build on this website right here. The first thing you're going to want to do is pick an ability. For this build, I'm going to be using Panetti's Replicating Missile. This isn't really the strongest leveling skill, but I think we can make it work. And before we actually start putting gear on our character and building him up, we should keep in mind some goals, or thresholds rather, that we want to meet with our character. For offense, we're going to want to get 3000 defensive ability. We're going to want to deal damage of only one type. If you look at Panetti's here, it deals elemental damage and aether damage, so we would want to pick between one or the other. We're going to want 2000% increased damage of the type that we picked, 100% resistance reduction of our chosen damage type, and you're going to want to get as much attack or cast speed, whatever your skill needs, and crit damage as you can get. For defense, we want to get 3000 defensive ability, 2000 armor with 100% armor absorption. We're going to want to cap all of our resistances. We're going to want 20% physical resistance, 60% stun resistance. We're going to want to get some freeze and some slow resistance. Entrapment and petrify are nice to get, but I don't think they're mandatory. They're the least common forms of CC that you're going to encounter. 12 to 15k life is going to be really nice to have. And you're going to need some form of health recovery. Health potions just aren't going to cut it. Usually most people resort to attack damage converted to health. And if you're able to meet all of these benchmarks, you're going to have a pretty good build. For your first build though, you don't have to hit all of them, but you want to get as close to them as possible and just kind of use them as reference points. If your build ends up at the end of this all having 20k health, but only 2600 offensive ability, then you know hey, maybe I should get rid of some health and get some more offensive ability. So just keep these things in mind while we're going through this process. So the first and easiest thing to do to scratch off that checklist is just to choose our damage type. Panetti's is going to be dealing aether or elemental damage. Elemental damage is considered one damage type in this game, and you can get away with dealing elemental damage, but you could also convert it to just fire, just lightning, or just cold. But to get the skill to deal one damage type, we're going to have to convert it. And since there's no modifier on the skill itself in the skill tree to do this, we're going to have to resort to our gear. So we're going to have to come over here to Grim Tools' item database. We can type in Panetti and see what items come up and which of them have conversions for Panetti's Replicating Missile. And most skills are going to have a monster infrequent item that converts its damage from one type into another. So we can just only search for green items and see what pops up here. And right here we have a metal that is going to convert all of our elemental damage into aether damage. We can click on the monster and see where it spawns. And we're going to find out that this is actually a boss in Ancient Grove. And I think that it's farmable and it's easy enough to get. So for our first character, it looks like we're going to be dealing aether damage. So now we can choose a second class. Something that's going to complement our aether damage dealing Panetti's Missile. And I chose the Necromancer class. The Necromancer class has aether resistance reduction. It can boost our offensive ability and defensive ability up quite a bit. And it has some useful skills for keeping us alive, which being alive is really useful if you want to deal damage. And now that we've got the class selection taken care of, we can start actually putting some gear into the build. For your first character, you're going to want to choose gear that is easily accessible. And if you're new, you might not. It's really hard to tell what gear is easily accessible and what isn't. So here is another list of things that I think are easily accessible. Faction vendor gear is undoubtedly the first thing that probably is going to pop into anyone's mind. You get this by raising your reputation up with the factions of Cairn, and they're going to sell you progressively more powerful gear. This is great for leveling and for kind of early endgame and like getting your foot into the door for some endgame content. The only factions that sell endgame gear are the Coven of Ugnabog, Barrowholm, the Malmoth Resistance, and all of the cults. So if you're looking for endgame gear, those are pretty much the ones you want to go to. You can go to the item database here and you can just click on all of the factions and you'll get a list of all of the vendor gear that they sell. And it's going to be really useful for building your first character. Another really easily accessible pieces of gear are going to be monster infrequents. We can just do what we did when we were looking for an item to convert our damage. Just in the search bar of the item database, type Panetti, look at the monster infrequents, and any that look good to you, add them into your build. Like here we have the Gravellstone Effigy. This thing's pretty good. I'm going to be using this. And if you've ever asked anyone for help with this game as a new character, I guarantee they probably pointed you in the direction of the Krieg set or the Dark One set. These are farmable legendary sets that are kind of aimed at new players or people like just starting out. You can search these up on Google or even like YouTube. There's tons of guides out there for builds using these sets. I would definitely say they're easier to get than any other legendary set, but that doesn't mean they aren't hard to get. You still have to build a decent character first to be able to farm the content that these drop from. But that said, I mean, the barrier to entry isn't that high. Another decent source of gear is actually some quest items. I mean, there's a few that you could use when you're first starting out, like the Slith Primal Ring is really good, and the Sacred Talisman is also pretty good for your first character. I'm actually going to be using both of these items. The ring gives you a lot of resistances, and the relic is basically just a free relic. That's going to give you a lot of damage and some mana regen. There's also blue sets in the game, or unique sets. These aren't as good as legendary sets, but that makes them more common. And with the Forgotten Gods DLC, you're going to be able to transmute items into another piece of the same set. And there's blue sets out there that only have like 2 or 3 pieces, and they're really not that uncommon. And we actually use one of those in this build, and they can be some really powerful stepping stones that you can use to increase your power before you actually start getting like all these legendary items from farming endgame content. And that's pretty much it as far as easily accessible items go. Even things though like blue items, you're going to need to do quite a bit of farming before you do get like a complete set, but it's not impossible. You're much more likely to get a blue set than you are like a full legendary set. And even in some faction vendor gear, you're going to notice there's a bunch of legendary recipes. Don't count on getting these right away because the crafting materials that it takes to craft them, a lot of them require items that you can only get through random drops. So some of them are reliable, some of them aren't. But after you've gone through the process of getting all your gear together, you can build your skill tree. Hopefully you went through and picked gear that boosted up a bunch of the skills that are, related to your class. If not, you should probably do that. And every skill in your class skill tree can be raised 10 points higher than what it says. Like see, for Panetti's, it has a maximum of 16. Is what it says in the skill tree, but you can actually raise this to 26 by increasing its level through gear. And we increased the level quite a bit, so we actually don't have to invest that many points in order to get our Panetti's Replicating Missile maxed out, which lets us invest it elsewhere in the skill tree. This is why you want to wait until after you put your gear on your character to do your skill tree, because it's going to change quite a bit based on what gear you're wearing. Next, I like to build my devotion tree. This can definitely be overwhelming if you're new, but if you just focus on a couple things, I think it makes it a lot easier. The main thing I focus on when I'm building my devotion tree is I need ways to reduce the enemy's resistances and have some way of sustaining my health pool while getting as much offensive and defensive ability as possible. If you keep these three things in mind, it becomes a lot easier. And for this build specifically, since we have some of our weapon damage getting added to our Panetti's Replicating Missile, we can use attack damage converted to health, so I grab some of that on the tree when I can get it. And the Revenant and Widow constellations are good sources of resistance reduction for Aether damage, so I definitely want to be pathing into those constellations. And to be honest, the thought of my Panetti's Replicating Missile, like spawning skeletons, actually sounds really cool and makes me more excited to play this build. And after we build the devotion tree, we're almost done. All we got left to do is put components onto our gear to help cap our resistances and raise our offensive and defensive ability. And then after we put our components on our gear, we need to do the same thing with augments. And hopefully by this point, you've capped all of your resistances and you can focus on augments that are just increasing your offensive and defensive ability, or your percent damage. I'll have a link down in the description for this actual Grim tools that we're looking at right now. You'll definitely notice that if we go way back to the beginning of the video, I definitely did not meet all the benchmarks, but I did meet a lot of them, and I would say from just knowing from personal experience that I could probably make it into Ultimate, but I'm definitely not going to be able to finish Ultimate. At least not on Hardcore. On Softcore I probably could. Like, it doesn't matter if I eat a few deaths. But it's also important because now I know what my weaknesses are. Like, I don't have enough armor, I don't think. My Fizz resist is a little low, and so is my health. So I should probably avoid any physical damage dealing enemies like the Plague. But I do think I'm going to be able to make it at least to Homestead. And if I make it there, I can farm Steps of Torment, the Roguelike Dungeon, and I'll be able to farm everything else I need for the build, besides my metal, which I can just farm that in Elite or Normal. And you can also farm the Krieg set pieces in Elite as well. If you look in Grim Tools in the monster database, you'll notice that for the Krieg set pieces to drop, the monsters that you kill only have to be level 75. So farming for the Krieg set in Elite is probably a really good idea, because you can get your Mammoth Resistance reputation up and get the Krieg set pieces at the same time, which Mammoth Resistance is probably the most important faction to get your reputation up with, because they also give you the Experience Potion, which makes leveling every other character twice as fast. And since I only use the boots and the gloves, that makes farming it a lot faster as well, because not only do I have to farm less of the set, I don't have to go all the way into the Fleshworks to kill a boss, which saves so much time. But thank you for watching. If you'd like to continue your education, enrollment is free. All you have to do is like and subscribe. I wish you the best of luck in all of your endeavors, and I hope to see you again soon.